All right, everybody, welcome back. I've got an amazing guest for you guys today. His name is Bill Thompson, and Bill is just an outstanding individual. He goes into detail, is very detail oriented in what he does, loves hunting, loves the outdoors, but more than anything, and most recently your adventures here, you are the CEO of Spartan Forge. If you guys haven't heard of Spartan Forge, it is a mapping app that we're going to go into detail here and talk about a lot more. But first of all, Bill, for people who don't know who are you in a nutshell?
A disagreeable jackass. Now, my name is Bill Thompson. Like you said, I served in the military for almost a little over 21 years. Um, and I did that since I was 17. So, I mean, really at my core, I'm a soldier. I've been out of the military now for 2 years, so most of that soldier has melted away, but it's still there somewhere. Um, and I'm also a hunter, and for the majority of my military career, I worked in the intelligence disciplines, and for the latter part of my career, I focused on um, offensive cyber operations and human intelligence operations and signal intelligence operations. All of those things kind of put me in this realm where I was coming up with ideas and developing um, kit for the military to use on deployed combat operations, and that what kind of made it obvious to me that there was as a hunter and as a soldier, you're trying to solve targeting operations, and that there are as we kind of talked about before we recorded, there are palatable, easy to understand ways to do that, but you're also trying to gain some level of efficiency at the same time. So that's a balancing act that as the product as a, not only as like the CEO, which really to me is kind of a useless term. I really view myself as the product owner, which to me derives the same amount of responsibility and charge as CEO does. Um, I'm really ultimately the product owner, and that is that balance that I'm trying to strike while presenting, a lot more data and capability than other mapping apps out there present. And in that same that lexicon, I try to I'm trying to we started as a mapping application, but as we evolve, I see us more as a planning application. And what I mean by that is there's stuff in the application like historical weather data. There's natural forage and fruit bearing tree data, and it talks buck to doe ratios and what do those things mean. And there's an artificial intelligence that does movement prediction, and there's um, a team organization tool called Blue Force Tracker that allows you to auto share pins with your buddies. There's a LiDAR layer that uses very highly calibrated sensors on board aircrafts to do foliage penetrating ground mapping. So there's historical mapping. So what I'm trying to say is, mapping to me is commodity. In other words, it's like oil. It's everywhere and lots of people can sell it, and it's not something people try to make oil unique by saying we've got some additives that make our oil better. But at the end of the day, it's oil and it's a commodity. And so mapping has become commodity. In other words, you could start a mapping application this weekend and using something like a product like Mapbox, you could be dropping pins on a map in a week. Now it would be very limited, but yeah. So I'm trying to shift that paradigm or that optic about that concerning our application to that planning and hunting and post planning and hunting execution, post execution. And again, I'm kind of lifting that from the military, but the military kind of had this ethos that drives the targeting process called find, fix, finish, exploit, analyze, and disseminate, which basically meant find the enemy, fix on the enemy, finish the enemy, exploit the materials and intelligence that's left behind, analyze them, and then make sense of them and disseminate them. So I'm trying to do the same thing for the hunter. Find the animal, target the animal, kill the animal, and you've removed that animal. Now go check out his bed. Like a lot of hunters don't do this, and I encourage hunters to do it. If you kill a buck, go into where you think he was bedding. Go in and really drop pins because there's going to be another buck that will take that area over the next year. So while there's not a buck living there, or as long as you think there isn't, go in there and aggressively scout and get your rub lines and your bedding areas and where was this guy hanging out during the daylight hours? Find all of that stuff out, because it's going to make you a better hunter. So, and then the dissemination piece of that is kind of where a hunter would differ from the military, because a lot of that stuff you want to hold on to. But if you're hunting with your kids, you're hunting with your father, your father-in-law, your friends, your wife, or whatever, a tool like Blue Force Tracker allows you to disseminate that information and distribute it along a group of people, so that the friction for other people to learn what you're doing doesn't involve you texting 1,000 pins through a text messaging
Yeah.
protocol. You're using an application that is readily sharing it with you and the people that you want it shared with, in a fashion that it makes it easy. And then we're going to up the ante, and there'll be chat associated with the Blue Force geometry, and there'll be auto location sharing. So it's a way to buy down risk, disseminate information, but also kind of make the entire experience easier. So the guy who does all of that, or not does it, the person who's identifying those product requirements and trying to wrap that all in, is who I am today. So that kind of finishes your question of who I am. And I apologize, I don't have any short answers for anything, because I really care about making sure that people understand exactly what I'm doing and where I'm coming
Hmm.
from. And I think it's important to not just flippantly say, I'm the owner of Spartan Forge,
Right.
But anyway.
No, I agree, and that's something too that's really key for people to understand, that there's a lot of these features that are put into this app. And again, we were talking about this before we started recording, but I've delved into the app a little bit. But a lot of people might look at it and then think, "Oh man, this is difficult." And we'll get into this in a little bit. It's because we've been so trained on other applications that you don't realize really what you're holding in your hands and what capabilities there are there. So there's going to be future videos, and there are videos right now that explain these things, but we'll get into that here shortly. First off, I'm interested. You were in the military for over 20 years. What was your background? You're obviously a very technical, detail oriented guy. So I'm assuming it had to do something along those lines. Your career in the military.
Yeah, so I was an enlisted guy first, and I did intelligence. First, I started in electronic intelligence, which was like the study of radars. I have an engineering background. I only did that job for about 4 years. It was like a very Cold War centric job that I was looking forward to moving past, because we were entering into the global war on terrorism at the time. So when the global war on terrorism started, I did like kind of tactical SIGINT, which, electronic intelligence or radio or radar analysis is more like strategic SIGINT. Think like, you're looking at a whole country and trying to understand what their electronic order of battle looks like. I got down to tactical SIGINT, which was, how do I defeat enemy communications? How do I make sure that an enemy can't communicate before they're on an objective, or while we're, infilling an objective? So I took that step and moved to the tactical intelligence realm. The Army sent off, and I learned some languages. So I did like Russian and French. I started doing a lot of work in the special operations community, and then I transitioned into becoming a warrant officer, which is it's, I don't know if you served, or if you know people who served, or you know what a warrant officer is, but it's kind of like it's the technician for line block chart military units.
Yeah. Hmm.
So what they recognized was they had enlisted guys that had the aptitude and the expertise that they either didn't want to lose to like a government contractor, or get sucked up into senior enlisted work where they would just be stuck being a leader. Not stuck being a leader, but if they weren't suited to be a leader, which, I'm more suited to be a technician than I am a leader of men. Even though I did the leader of men thing, there were better ones than me. And so the warrant officer is that technician that they're giving the charge of an officer and the rank and clout of an officer, but they're making them focus on more technical things, whether that's designing systems, combat systems, being an advisor to a field grade officer on the implementation of this or the training of soldiers. And so I moved into that job and stayed in the intelligence realm, and then got back into the special operations community, and first did operations supporting combat operations, whether it was I deployed multiple times to Iraq, and to Afghanistan, the Philippines, southern Philippines. A lot of people don't even know we went to war there. as well as in Africa, Horn of Africa, Northern Africa, Tunis, Mali, all of these places doing operations as a warrant officer in the signals intelligence, human intelligence, and cyber realm. And then from there, for like my last 4 years, I was an advisor to first a colonel and then a general officer on how we man, train, and equip the cyber and SIGINT forces for the military. And it was kind of, towards the end of my career in 2015. I retired in 2021, but towards the end of my career in 2015, when I was kind of entering into like the political strata of the military, I did one of my last deployments, and it was kind of crystallized for me that there was something in the hunting realm that I wanted to do on the outside, based on the work I'd been doing in meaningful targeting and analyzing enemy networks using artificial intelligence. Um, Kind of for me, the next step that I wanted to pursue post military was to do that. Most guys in my position become government contractors, or they go and continue building weapons for a private company, or that. Not only did that not appeal to me, it disgusted me. I just did not want to go that route. And I didn't, it's just I don't have anything against people that go that route. It's just, um, there's a problem with the military and the military industrial complex where, some general officer or someone gives General Dynamics a ton of contracts while he's a general officer, and then he retires and now he's working for General Dynamics, and he makes hand over fist money for 5 years, and then he retires and goes off into the sunset. That cycle really disgusted me personally. Um,
Okay.
and it's not because I'm better than anyone or anything like that. I'm just an asshole. Excuse me. I don't know if I should swear or not, but
Oh, you're
you
good.
can bleep me out. Sorry. I'm just a very disagreeable person when it comes to those things, and I
Mhm.
generally speak my mind. That has worked really well with me for some officers that I worked for and some generals that I worked for, and it worked really badly for me in other cases. So, that cycle didn't appeal to me in the least, and I knew I wanted to be in the hunting community, and that was kind of the genesis of Spartan Forge, or that was the first time I started thinking realistically about it, towards the end of my career.
Oh, for sure. And that's, I grew up right outside of Fort Bragg, and I don't think we've
Oh,
discussed this, but my whole family's military. My grandpa retired a lieutenant colonel at Fort Bragg out of the 82nd Airborne, and he told me, he was like, "You're too smart to go enlisted, so either go officer or don't get in the military." I
yeah,
was like, "Okay." So
yeah,
I chose a different route, and I've seen everything. My dad was a Marine. I've got family in the Air Force, Army. So I definitely understand that lifestyle is hard on families. It's hard on obviously the men that leave, men or women that leave their families, but it's also hard on the families that are left at home. And so that's something that's definitely near and dear to my heart. So that sacrifice is definitely seen and understood on my end. And at the same time, I can see where you're coming from of not wanting to follow that path of going down, the contractor outside of the military once you're done. And I think what you've done is you've taken your skill set and you're definitely applying it to uh, I guess, a realm that needs that skill set. And you've taken all this training that you received over these 20 plus years in the military, and you're able to turn that into something that is successful. It aids in conservation. There's so many good things that go into what Spartan Forge is doing and what it will do in the future, with the vision that you have for it, that it's outstanding. And so I can see why you would want to shift and go that way, because I'm sure you'd make way more money going into contracting and doing all these other things that are other businesses that you could have gone into, but instead, you may say you're an asshole and disagreeable, but that's fine. Speak your mind and do what you want to do, and you're sharing it with other people. You're not just hoarding that knowledge, which is something else that a lot of people do, maybe unintentionally, but you're definitely sharing that with other people and applying it to something that right now there's a I guess a metaphorical battlefront with, hunters and the anti-hunters, and stuck in the middle we've got the non-hunters. and so sharing this education, how you're going about doing it, how that aids in conservation as well, is something that can help in that the scenario as well. So you're doing a ton, and just getting to know you in the little bit that I have, you seem like a genuine person, and let people call you an asshole all they want, man. It's being genuine and upfront and speaking your mind is definitely the way to go.
Yeah, I mean, you said a lot there and you nailed it. First, I'd like to tell you that the only time someone ever tried stabbing me was in Fayetteville. Um, so at a pool hall.
Well, I went to Southview High School, so if you know where that, yeah,
I
yep.
know. I've heard of it. I had friends whose kids went there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I used to go there to they have what's called the JFK Special Warfare Center in school,
Mm-hmm.
on Fort proximal to Fort Bragg, and so yeah, I've been out there a few times, and there are great parts of that area, by the way. Like a lot of people poo-poo on it just because of Vietnam, as we like to call it, but like
Yep.
you get not far away from there, and you got some pretty awesome places,
Oh yeah.
and a lot of great places for kids to be. But yeah, I mean, on that point, and then um, you had made a second point there that I wanted to hit on, and I can't remember what it was, but it doesn't matter. You had made a bunch of great points there. I think the key takeaway, I guess, is well, the other great point actually that I just thought of that you made was that is a leadership thing, and I observed it in the military, and that was people either hoard or distribute information as a means for power, or not for a means of power, but for a means of influence. And the people that hoarded the information, I knew some people who hoarded information and they were still effective leaders, or they could still be good leaders. But my experience was the people who distributed information as much as possible and made everyone kind of understand the battlefield in that way were the ones who inspired people the most, but also grew the best leaders under them.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried to go with that leadership view as well, because my thought was, yeah, I will be like if I'm a minor, I would always equate being a military leader as like being in the major league or minor leagues. Like, yeah, I'm gonna promote a lot of people up out, and they're gonna go somewhere and do something better, hopefully. Like a minor league coach might be like, yeah, I've got a lot of guys that go to the major leagues, but I'm hoping that the people with the potential for the major leagues look at my farm club and say, well, I want to go there because that guy's moving people in the major leagues. And that was my thought in the military, especially when I was in the small teams or the special operations community. I got to recruit or choose the guys that I worked with. So my thought was the more people that was getting promoted out of my job or out of my unit or going off to do big and great things, the more talented people I would attract. So, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head there, because that's kind of like, I try not to use a lot of the standard conventions, whether it's with politics or leadership. Like for leadership, it's people who want everyone around them to get better, or people that want to control everyone around them, is kind of the dynamic that I look at, the rubric that I use to examine leadership. Just with politics, I don't use the Republican or Democrat rubric to examine political actors. I use the people who want to be left alone and people who won't leave people alone. So you can be an old school hippie liberal that wants to smoke weed in your basement every day, but I don't care about those people. Like, they don't bother me. Like, go fly your freak flag. I don't care what you're doing with your time, as long as you're not trying to tell me how I need to spend my time. And there are lots
Exactly.
of those people. Like my stepfather's one of those guys. He's like an old school hippie, retired Navy guy. Somebody would assign him a very lefty type of political association if you were to examine it in the traditional distribution of politics. But he also doesn't want to. He also wants to leave everyone alone and just let them do their thing. So that to me is the most useful level of analysis. So I commend you, because I think you hit it there.
I appreciate that. Well, let's delve into the specifics here on Spartan Forge, because, like I said, I've gone into it a little bit, but I'm not to the point where I can post my own, review and talk about it on my own. So definitely wanted you to come in and talk about this amazing product and app that you've put out. You've got some big names behind you as well that obviously know what they're doing. They're killers. They're great at what they do with hunting. So the fact that they believe in it as well is another testament to this product that you have that's coming into a market where there's quite a few of these apps for mapping. And like you said, there's some people are trying to reinvent the wheel when in reality, what you're trying to do is you're just saying, look, we've got all the best technology right here. This is what you can do with it. Let me make it as simple as possible for you to be able to use all of this technology, from LiDAR, which I don't know of anyone else that has that, to this AI tracking, which AI can scare the crap out of some people. But if you're trying to track deer, like for example, me, I know nothing about whitetail hunting. And so I'm going out to Ohio, kind of just, my buddy's like, hey, this is where you should sit. I'm going to sit there. I'm popping the first two does I see and then a buck, whatever's legal. That's kind of my strategy. But some people really get into the weeds on this. So I guess let's start out with, the AI tracking or the AI features that you have for deer, and then maybe some other highlights that you want to bring up of your Spartan Forge app.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a lot, packed into the question that you just asked. I think, the first useful level of analysis is just, and I kind of said it before, and I can't remember if it was when we were recording or not, but there's that. I don't know if you've heard the saying like soup to nuts. Have you heard that expression before? So a lot of people don't even know what that means, but it used to be like soup was the appetizer, then you had your main course, and then you had the nuts, which was usually your dessert. So that's like the full meal, right? And so a lot of the applications kind of focus on the mapping, which might be your main course, but there's things that have to happen before the mapping, and there are things that have to happen after the mapping. Um, and I'm more interested in how do I identify all of the particulars in that targeting cycle that you would use. We started on whitetail deer. Now we're expanding out from there, and we're doing more Western focused mapping data and some really cool stuff in the off season that we're doing. And then some of our prediction models are going to be more Western focused. But regardless of the species, what we wanted to do, or what I wanted to do, and what we're subsequently doing as a company, is from the moment you decide you want to start whitetail hunting to the moment you are chopping the meat up and putting it in the freezer, what can I present you in the form of an application that gets you from A to Z? And that, to me, in the terms of the military, is a targeting cycle, set to reset. And so in that targeting cycle, the useful officers in the military and the useful planners and the useful executioners, the people that would go out and conduct the operations, you break targeting into its constituent elements, and then out of those constituent elements, you identify the variables that you attach to success within the domain of that target species or human. And then you identify the repositories of those information, and then you try to bring data into your targeting cycle and make it as usable and understandable and accountable I first identify all of those things, but then present them to the user, and kind of do and automate that cycle and account for those variables so that you can present the hunter, in this case the hunter, with an all-encompassing solution. So as that pertains to the whitetail hunter and subsequently a mule deer hunter or an elk hunter, it's like, what's the food look like? How many different views of the map can I get? What does it look like when I penetrate foliage? Where do I find the food? At what times of the year is the food palatable for the animal? What is the historical wind in the area? What does the topography look like? How do I count and understand all of that stuff? So like one of the ways to do that was, we have a journaling feature, and all of the super successful hunters that I know use journals. And I'm not saying it's their success. It could just be that they have a fundamental aversion towards diligence, and diligence involves journaling. Maybe it doesn't matter, but they write down information, and I think you remember more and you can articulate things better when you actually write them out. Like I keep a journal, a personal journal. I keep a hunting journal, and so we have a journal in there, so you can start. And it does historical weather. So if you saw a deer a week ago and you're going through your trail camera photos or your photos in your phone, you can upload that phone into the journal. You can put the time series. It will go grab that historical weather. You can categorize the animal, and it'll make a journal entry. And so that's in the military, we would call that the intelligence preparation of the battlefield, or like what are the what are the what are the what are the information requirements that I need to account for. So that scouting really is, I'm trying to help automate and structuralize the scouting discipline, so that somebody who's never hunted whitetail or taken scouting seriously can pick up that journaling feature and start scouting and understand things. And then inside of that, I'll give them information like what is the buck to doe rate. Like in Ohio, if you go to the Spartan Forge app and you drop your you put your cursor wherever you're going in Ohio and you push that intel tab, you're going to get the historical wind in that area. You're going to get the food that is consumed naturally by the animals in that area. You're going to get things like the buck to doe ratio. You're going to get the hunter success rating last year based on a percentile of like 100 hunters, how many people are successful. You're going to get the season dates. You're going to get, I think I said it, but like the natural occurring food. You're going to get that historical wind information. You're going to get a myriad of things, plus an artificial intelligence prediction based on collared deer data from animals in the Ohio and Pennsylvania Valley and the surrounding area, of how a machine looks at how the data, or crunches the data and says how deer move in that area. You're going to get the peak, the secondary and first and secondary hunting dates, or I'm sorry, the peak breeding dates and rutting dates. You're going to know a lot of stuff before you ever step on the ground. And that's not meant to replace scouting. It's meant to optimize scouting. So when you drop that thing, like as a point of contact, when you drop your, when you look at that intel tab for the area that you're going to, my guess is that you are looking at like a west to northwest wind, probably something like 15 to 30% of the time. So that means, while you're out there, if you're out there for 6 days, you're guaranteed that 2 of those days are going to have that north to northwest wind. And now you start looking for topography and you start looking for areas that would keep deer out of that cold northwest wind. And now you're starting to put an action plan together of where you're going to go scout on these hillsides. If you're actually going to go do the scouting, like you said, you got a buddy showing you a stand, but still, you can still look at that stand location and drop it and then flip it into the LiDAR layer and then turn on some configurable topo lines, and then you look at that wind and you start to get an idea of why he's been successful in that stand just by looking at all of those data points. And so all of this, right, is in the app and built out in the app and is meant for you to be there and pull apart before you ever step into the property. And then during the hunt, dropping points, the predicted weather, the predicted movement for the day, journaling what you see live while you're in the field. The Blue Force Tracker piece, if you and your buddy both have the Spartan Forge app, the guy whose property you're going to hunt, he can draw like a geometry around that whole hunting area that you have access to, or the public area. And every point that he has in there and every photo on every point that he has in there will be auto shared with you. And then you're able to go and look at all of that information and again put it together and understand the land more comprehensively. And then in a upcoming update, when you enter that area, if you have service, you'll be live sharing your location. And then under that area, you'll be able to chat about the location while you're in there. And so whether you're hunting with a kid or an adult or a friend, or I had friends that I hunted in Maryland with, 3 or 4 guys that I went out with all the time, and we would share points and scout and hunt the same public land together. It really just wears the friction down, but we're also doing stuff with property landowners, and I can get into that later. But then, post hoc, after the hunt is done, whether you're successful or unsuccessful, you're able to look at those journals, you're able to look at your entry and your egress, you're able to observe what the actual wind was. You're able to kind of pick apart the wind in that post hoc fashion, and then understand, did I choose the wrong day? Did I choose the wrong wind? Was I winded while I was on the stand, and what contributed to that? And then reformulate your plan of action before you go back in there. And I keep forgetting whether this is something I said to you before or after, but I think something that a lot of hunters miss is once they are successful, there's 2 things I think a lot of guys, and I didn't do it, especially when I was young, is they didn't look at the factors that contributed to them being successful and then document them so that they make sure that they repeat those things. But then secondly to that, someone will kill a buck in an area where he might have ruled the roost, and they won't go scout those areas or get really aggressive in those areas right afterwards, or even look how the buck left the area and just try to understand, like, where was he going, what was he doing after he was shot. what scrapes and rubs did I see while I was in these areas that I generally left off of. If you leave off of them, some guys hunt beds, so like obviously they might have that intel. But if you're not hunting in the bedroom, or you don't have the field craft or the prior knowledge, the a priori knowledge before you go in there to do that, well then that's the time to do it, and go drop as many points as you can and understand. And in that military, we call that sensitive site exploitation. But the thought is the same: is right, the operation's over, bad guys are dead. What magazines were in there? What were the mailing addresses of where things were coming from? What computers were in there? What was on the computers? What kind of vehicle did they have? What kind of telemetry data can I pull from the vehicle? Um, what can I do to make this better for next time? It looks like I'm getting zoomed out here. I don't know what's going on.
So yeah, but no, that's so much information that can be really useful for people, especially like I said, like me, that I don't really know a lot. I do know how to read terrain features and things like that coming from the west going east, but I don't really understand whitetail that much. So it's cool, and I love what you're saying. You're talking about blueprinting your process basically, and I know Joel Turner talks about this with his shot IQ, and it's something that I know works because I've used it, and getting a successful shot to be repeatable, and then blueprinting what that is for you. And the funny thing is, a lot of people get upset because they're like, oh, well, Joe Turner's way isn't the right way, or this way is not the right way. And I'm like, well, okay, but once you find something that's repeatable for you, that's your right way. There's so many ways to shoot a bow, so many different releases, so many ways to shoot a rifle, so many ways to shoot in, whatever weapon it is that you choose. And in this case, mapping and finding success is the same thing. If you want to be consistently good, then blueprint what your process is. And like you said, those that are successful consistently seem to have a journal of some sort, whether it's a mental journal or like they know what works, and they follow that, and they get it every time. And that's something that is definitely key in hunting specifically. But any of the tools that you choose to use, you want the same kind of arrow. People, are so hyper focused on getting the arrow cut the exact same length, the same amount of glue, the same broadhead, like all of these things. They blueprint their arrow, but they don't think about blueprinting the shot process, blueprinting their, scouting process, etc. And that's something that you've definitely done. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, like I said before, I know lots of hunters that are, I think some of the best in the world, and I don't think I know any of those hunters that are hugely successful that aren't that diligent about their process and what they're putting into it. If your guys don't know who he is, or if you want to really get into somebody who knows their whitetail, I mean, we've got a bunch of them on the staff, but from that diligence perspective, there's a guy on our staff named Andy May, and that guy takes engineering paper with himself into the woods, and he documents everything about every hunt that,
Hmm.
period. Um, and it's hugely beneficial. And like I said before, if people ask me like, what is the most common thing among these hunters that you work with, like the great hunters, like what are they bringing to the table? And it's work ethic and diligence is the common thread.
Oh, I could definitely see that. And again, I'm big into, fitness and nutrition. It's funny because I'm kind of going on this journey where, a lot of other things have grown in the last couple years. But I'd say in the last probably year and a half, I've let nutrition not completely fall off, but it hasn't been in my priority. It hasn't been in my sights. And so I kind of hit a spot where I was like, okay, I need to, if I'm going to be leading from the front, the way that I talk about, I need to dial my nutrition back in, because nutrition is so important to hunting, longevity, being a dad, everything that I talk about. And so it's funny because over the last week, there's been my body has basically told me I don't want to make this change. I don't want to go back there. But my mind and my heart say, yes, you need to go back there. Well, today I just had, I got through some nasty stuff over the last week. And then today I hit just an amazing day, some goals that I had set for that first week. And I'm like, wow, it's weird. I blueprinted this thing, going back to blueprinting. I blueprinted this thing when I got to what I would consider my most fit in the last couple of years. And I just followed that blueprint again. And guess what? In a week, I'm hitting these goals that I've set. It's crazy how that happens, but it is so key. And I think it's with any sport, any professional sport, whether that be hunting, baseball. You know, they say I think they say baseball is like some of the most uh, superstitious people out there. They're so stuck in their ways of I need my shoe tied a certain way. Basketball players, football players, they all have their thing to be successful, and the greats are the ones that have that blueprinted down to a T. And people from an outside might look at it like weird. You're weird for doing it this way, but they do it that way for a reason, right? So yeah, blueprinting definitely works in every aspect of life, but even more specifically here in hunting.
For sure. I couldn't agree with you more. Yep.
Awesome. So we've talked about the journaling, the Blue Forest tracker, or the Blue Forest feature, which I think is awesome, because it is a little frustrating sometimes to have to send pins, to every different person that you want to have the pin. Obviously, the other person has to have the Spartan Forge app, but you're able to share that, and I think it's cool that you guys are going to have that chat feature and things like that coming out here in the future. But with the AI feature and the Blue Force, we're also talking about the LiDAR. So I guess talk to people a little bit about what LiDAR does in respects to hunting and scouting. That would be beneficial to people, because I haven't seen it in any of the other apps that I've used before.
Yeah, so LiDAR is just a fancy way of saying light detection and ranging. So radar is radio detection and ranging. And basically all that, what the simplified way of, well, you could think about it this way. Whether it's light, it's waveform in the form of radio magnet generated waveform, or it's your voice, whatever it is, it propagates through the air. And when it encounters resistance, it comes back at you. So whether you're in a cave or a canyon yelling, if you know the speed of sound, you can calculate how far away whatever your voice bounced off of based on the speed of sound. It's the same with radar. If the radio knows how quickly the pulse that is being shot out of the radar gun is traveling, then it can do some implied algebra, and it can figure out how fast the object was traveling, so a cop can pull you over. With LiDAR, it's light detection and ranging, so it's using light to hit the ground, and light at the wavelength that it operates at penetrates canopy and it penetrates trees, and the only thing it bounces off of is the ground. So that light detection sensor, or that light propagation and detection sensor, sends light out. The light comes back, penetrates off the ground. So when you're doing it even on a house, it penetrates the house. So the light goes out, hits the ground, comes back, and then it maps the area for you. And the light penetrates trees, gets the ground, comes back at you. All of that is hugely helpful, especially, well, it's helpful in every. I can give you a scenario where it's helpful for every type of hunter. I'll put it in the just for purposes, I'll just say whitetail. Out in Pennsylvania or even out west, anywhere they are, when other than times when they're extremely pressured, if there was a timber cut in an area, first it will expose timber cuts, and it'll expose anywhere where the ground has been leveled out. But the devices, when they're clearing the paths to go in and out, when they're logging an area, all of those paths remain after that's done. Whitetails will pick up those paths and use them as travel corridors, because they recognize whitetails are animals of transition. And so I'm not sure if elk are. I don't think they are. I think they more herd up and kind of travel as herds. But whitetail will use transition, whether it's vegetative transition, ground transition, as kind of like roadways. So when you understand the transition in the ground and you start to map these old logging trails, it's kind of like developing a road system for whitetails. So when you look at our LiDAR and you strip all of the trees away, you're getting an understanding of the ground that you wouldn't have unless you went and walked every square foot of that ground. So the idea is not to replace the scouting portion, it's to optimize the scouting portion. So under the guise of whitetails, wherever those paths, a lot of those types of paths lead together, you're generally going to have like a scrape. in that area that animals are using to kind of play who's who in the zoo. And but also, elk will use paths of least resistance too. But then also with the LiDAR, you can actually see prevalent elk trails in areas where we have this 1 meter data. You can actually see the elk trails that are really carved, like when you see one that's really carved into the side of a mountain. But then also for the hunter, um, it can present you with ingress and egress routes that will be easier to get in and out of, even if you're not hunting whitetail, just because now you know of an old logging trail that's present that you might not have known about on a huge mountainside somewhere unless you walk the whole mountainside. So it maps out areas that otherwise you would have to walk every square foot of, and it shows you things that no topo map, or no matter how fine the lines of demarcation, or no how dense the topo lines are, or how good the imagery is. If somebody goes on our Spartan Forge Instagram, I actually take an area where I have 5 centimeter imagery, which means if there's a baseball on the ground, you can see the baseball in the imagery. It's the best imagery that's offered, period. And we
Wow.
have about half the U.S. is covered in that imagery. I had whitetails that were moving into a spot off of an adjacent property, and I just didn't have an understanding of why they always walked in the same way. But then the first
Hmm.
time I went in there with LiDAR, because I couldn't scout that area, it was evident. I could see that there were two drainages that came down the area, moved south to north to south, and that the whitetails were following those drainages before they emptied into my area. And I would never have known that unless I either had physical access to the property, or B, um, had that LiDAR layer. Like that's basically the only way that you would know those are there, because they were such small drainages. They're maybe 2 feet across. But it illustrates those things plainly. So that's LiDAR in a nutshell, and how it gets used and what it gets used for.
Oh, for sure. That's really cool. I'm definitely gonna have to delve into that app layer. And I guess because there's so many things that I want to talk to you about. We could talk for hours, but a lot of my listeners are Western hunters, or even if they are Eastern guys, they're listening to my stuff because I'm out here, I'm out west. They're aiming to come out west eventually. What makes your app different from some of the other ones that are out there for the Western hunter? Why would it be more beneficial for them to have your app? Because it has private layers, right? So you are still able to see public, private, etc. You do still have that capability. So there's not just one or two apps out there that do that, but you've got that capability, which is huge in some areas where it's checkerboarded, really annoying. But knowing where you're at, public versus private, is awesome. But also, I guess, what are some other features that the Western hunter is really going to be attracted to using your versus another one that might be out there?
Yeah, so there is a litany of things actually off the top of my head. But I mean, I guess the first one is that LiDAR thing that I've already talked about.
Hmm.
The second one is we are integrated Eastman's Tag Hub, which is like a Western draw odds feature, into the application itself. So a lot of the other applications out there keep them separated or bifurcated, where you're not actually able to examine the fruits of your scouting and then drop on top of it these layers and prediction systems and look at them in the same ecosystem.
Hmm.
So that is something, and we're fleshing that out. And we're also making other prediction layers and that type of stuff, um, that is going to kind of simplify the way that you do that, but also increase your chances of drawing in certain areas based on some heuristical data that we're deriving from the way that these things get done. And I would say those are like that. That's probably, I mean, for now, those are the major things. Like we're obviously putting in all the hunt layers and all of the species, all of that type of overlap. We all obviously we have the 5 centimeter imagery that I think covers something like 40% of the Western ecosystem. We're going to add that in the future, but also we on our next update we'll have 7 years of historical data for all of the U.S. at 1 meter resolution. So
Wow.
when you start talking about finding out where there have been historical burns or logging that might influence movement, knowing that type of information before you get on the ground will be hugely valuable. But then lastly, something like Blue Force Tracker, um, whenever you're doing an elk hunt with a large group of people, or you're trying to deconflict like a hunt space, or you're trying to pass those types of that scouting work that you've done in the past, or leading up to a hunt with a group of people, whether it's like a group of guys that you're elk hunting with or something else. Um, all of that gets shared very quickly. So kind of in the same vein of what I'm trying to do in the East, which we've just kind of, we're starting to move west. That, among other things, we're going to move into the future that I think will make for a really beneficial experience for anyone using the application, no matter where they are.
No, for sure. And I guess walk me through, because another big feature of, Western hunters are looking to be able to know their different units. Is
Yeah.
that part of the tag hub, or is that something that might be coming down the line? Like being able to swap from, for example, right here in Utah, we've got the late season archery, and that's a specific unit that you can use your over the counter tag in, as long as you've done the late season education. And then of course the different, some places have different areas for elk versus pronghorn versus mule deer. And is that a feature that's currently in the app, or something that might be coming down the line to be able to swap between those based on your the tag that you're wanting?
Yes, you'll be able to do all of that, and some of it, what you mentioned, you can already do in the system, and you can get a 14-day trial of it to kind of see how it works, like the Eastman's Take Hub ecosystem that's nested within the Spartan Forge app. Um, yeah, we're actually doing some really cool stuff that I'm reticent to talk about right now, but that will be coming out over the off season into next year. That's actually going to simplify a lot of that stuff that you just mentioned. So,
Awesome.
the first state was to kind of get all of that research and stuff in there so that that we can index the data in a way so we can manipulate it for the hunter in a meaningful way. Again, getting all of the data and then isolating the variables and having the right questions. So from the product owner standpoint, I can reconfigure the information in a way that makes it easily understandable right away for people at the endpoint who are consuming the info. So yeah, we're doing a lot there, and it's going to get more and more interesting as we progress along, I think.
For sure. No, that's awesome. Yeah, I guess those would be the biggest things that I personally use the mapping features for. I'd still say I'm in the greeny phase of hunting out west and hunter in general. I'm still learning. There's a lot of things that I don't know, so I'm sure there's a lot of people that have good questions out there. And whenever this posts on YouTube and for the audience, I'm definitely going to have people drop comments and ask questions based on what their experience, because there's people that have been hunting out here for decades, and I'm nowhere near that. So, but I think you've definitely touched on a lot of the main features of some other apps that you have, and even have more capability in the Spartan Forge app. So, I guess last question on Spartan Forge. What does Spartan Forge mean? Why that name? And yeah, where'd that come from?
So it's kind of nerdy and cliche, but you asked, so I'll tell you. Um, in the military, as an officer, we would do a lot of these things called staff rides, where essentially the general officer that was in charge would take kind of like his officers that he worked directly with and would go somewhere and learn about something. One of the places while I was stationed in Europe that was particularly interesting to me was we did a staff ride to, if you've seen the movie 300, we went to the area where the hot gates were, and we also went to Normandy. But what we did was, there were people that were doing these guides, and these guys would tell us about, what happened here and why it's of historical importance and what symbolically and historically kind of symbolized. And essentially within, as officers, we would break down the battle and say, why did this go this way? What can we learn from this? The important thing was not to forget what someone had to learn with blood or treasure, so that as we went into the future and prosecuted more combat operations on behalf of the U.S., that we weren't relearning things with blood or treasure that had already been learned. And
Mm-hmm.
one of them was the hot gates at Thermopylae, where the Spartans, which were a highly disciplined military force, um, essentially had the greatest fighting force pound for pound in the world, but they were also one of the smallest. And if you haven't read about Thermopylae, I encourage people to go and read about it. But with essentially something along the lines of 13,000 people total, the numbers vary. Between 13 and 30,000 people, I think, is what most historical accounts say. They held off a force of between 300,000 and 2 million. The numbers range again, and there are people who were there. But either way, they were heavily, heavily outnumbered. And what they did was they used the terrain to their advantage. And through superior discipline and rigor and military prowess, they were able to hold off a superior fighting force that was better equipped and more outnumbered them for a long period of time. I want to say something like a week to 10 days or something like that, by knowing the terrain that they were in. So that always stuck with me, even before the movie. Well, it was actually shortly after the movie came out, but I hadn't seen it yet. And I have an addictive personality, so I went through and I have a whole series of books over here, and a lot of them are about military battles, and whether it's Herodotus all the way up to Schwarzkopf. Learning these lessons, and the Spartans stuck out to me from how they conducted how their society was erected all the way through how they prepared their fighting forces. And then the term or the moniker Spartan just basically means simple and without, there's no pomp and circumstance involved. If something is Spartan, then it is exactly what is needed and the amount of what is needed, and that's what it is. And so from a application perspective, Spartan Forge is the tool maker for the Spartan, the person that provides the tools for the people that are living out that ethos. So that is the genesis of Spartan Forge, and also, it's a serious business, hunting. You're ending an animal's life. I think people forget that sometimes, but it's always forefront in my mind. And so the UI, the user interface, and the user experience of the app, I think, reflects that seriousness. And the company itself and our military origins. And I try to hire veterans, and whenever possible. I don't go out of my way to do it. I'll always give them a shake. It's a whole different podcast. But I try to bring veterans in that are similarly minded, and it's that ethos, which is you're not going to get a bunch of fly fishermen telling you why my multicolored app that's got all of this goofy BS in here is the thing that you need. It's going to be, the tool for the job that gives you the most pertinent information that you need to go forth and carry out this pastime that I love and that I pride myself on being a part of.
Love it. That was a really good explanation. I don't think that's very nerdy at all, and if it is, it's along the lines of nerdiness that I think I definitely like, and a lot of people out there that are in the outdoors enjoy. And so there's definitely a lot to be said about the fact that you tied in the fact that they use terrain to their benefit, and that they knew these things because they knew the area so well. Yeah. The Spartans did. And so you're just taking all these tools and helping people, which again, I think the biggest thing that I've noticed is that you're trying to make it as simple. It's still not easy. E-scouting's not easy. Scouting in general is not easy, but you're making it as simple as possible, combining all the tools into one spot so that people can still spend time with their families, be at home as much as we want to be, because I feel like a lot of people, especially since the COVID shutdown happened, people are at home more, and they realize, hey, I really like being around these people that I call family. And so being able to not always being able to put boots on the ground it can be detrimental, because that's definitely the best way to go about doing it. But
for sure,
being as efficient as possible from home on a computer and using your past data is definitely something that is really helpful. So for all those reasons, I definitely appreciate it. I'm looking forward to delving into the app a lot more and using it on this hunt that I've got here in November coming up, and hearing whatever else you guys have coming down the pike, because it's definitely something that is new. And again, for those people out there listening, you're obviously hunters. I would assume so if you're listening to my podcast. You have been trained on these other apps, and it can be hard to untrain your mind to go look at this other app, Spartan Forge. But I'm telling you, it's worth it. And there's going to be plenty of tutorial videos coming out for new features that are coming. But also there's some good videos out right now on YouTube. And I'll be doing my own breakdown of it as well, breaking it down with my simple mind, because Bill's got an amazing mind that's very technical and can break all this stuff down for you. But I'm very simple, and I'm just going to say, hey, this is what you click here, and this is what you click there. So, but I definitely appreciate it, Bill. I appreciate you definitely highlighting the things that you're proud of. You can tell you're proud of your work. And again, that you're very detail oriented, which speaks volumes. You're not just trying to put something out there to make money or to compete, but you genuinely want people to get better at hunting and be able to spend as much time at home as possible as well. So I appreciate that, man.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for having me on. And anyone can reach out on social, and I interact with all the customers, so find me there at Spartan.Forge on Instagram. And thanks for listening.
Yeah, of course. Is there anything else you want to leave with the listeners before we head out?
I think I've blown enough hot air, but they can reach out to me on Spartan Forge, and I'm happy. I talk to everybody if they ask for me. You'll be interacting with me, so I look forward to seeing them all there.
Awesome. Perfect.
Right.
Well, thanks again, Bill, for your time. I really appreciate it. And guys listening, I'm going to leave all the links down below where you can find Spartan Forge and get into this app, and definitely check it out because it's already awesome and it's just going to get better. So thanks again, Bill. You guys have an amazing day. And of course, like I always say, get out, live your life, and love it.
Thank you.